Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you. And it's been a while. First of all, some of you who have been following these programs before, welcome back. And those of you who are new, welcome. And we're going to be continuing the study of one of the really great important works of Tibetan Buddhism, Treasury of Precious Qualities. And we are presently in the 9th chapter. So we're sort of ending towards the end of the first volume of the two volumes really that constitute the Treasury of Precious Qualities, which is really the work that deals with the sutra teachings. And so so this is a little bit towards the end of that. And so I think probably this program will be running for another couple of, I would say probably a couple of months, because there's a fair detail, but we'll have to see. This is the last chapter, but it's as you will see, it's fairly detailed. Anyway, I'd like to begin just with a short invocation of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. We'll just do this very brief, but I just thought this is actually something that's quite important to do. So let's see here. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So in presenting this program here, because we're beginning again after a bit of a break, I'd like to actually just sort of hone in on, give a little bit of an overview of what it is that we've covered thus far. And so I'm just going to go over you could say the structural outline of this work very briefly. But I think that would be quite helpful for us. Now, remember, one thing about this book is it covers an enormous amount of essential aspects of what we're doing on the Buddhist path. Now, in general, we, of course, have a lot of teachings that are happening, and they're very inspirational, and particularly we're blessed with many great teachers, and particularly in our Sangha, Tsongsa Gyalme Khyentse Rinpoche, who gives us some marvelous teachings that very often enable us to really seize points that are very subtle, and it really takes someone who is that sublime to not just convey the information, but also create the atmosphere in which something can transpire in terms of understanding what we're doing on the path or understanding difficult points. Because remember, when we're studying the Buddhist path, we're on a steep learning curve. It's not just that we're gathering information, but we're also gathering experience. We're gathering aspects that have to do with transforming our own being. And so this is vastly different from just becoming an academic or learning, you could say, an ordinary skill or collecting information. It's very much continually working with difficult issues that have to do with our habitual patterns, obscurations, and so on. So to have someone who, on the basis of their aspirations and their realization, teaches us, provides this condition of what we could call blessing that penetrates our ordinary rationality, our ordinary confusion. And that's why it's so important to study with sublime beings. And that's why it's so valuable that we have someone like Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, and of course also His Holiness Sakya Trinzen, the Dalai Lama, and so on, all of which are great teachers who provide insights that are so valuable on our journey. At the same time, also, we're looking at an incredible heritage of wisdom that comes down from the Buddha, and particularly in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you could say all the pit instructions that have accumulated over many centuries of Buddhism in Tibet, of which we then are sitting here with a splendid example of, namely the Treasury of Precious Qualities with Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary. And that's where very often in a traditional setting, then you have other teachers beside the great lamas that then sort of go over these works and really enable to fill in a lot of the culture and the information that really constitutes what we are supposed to know, actually, as we're on the path. We're supposed to know a lot of these things. Now, a lot of a lot of the information, of course, also is very much, you could say, it's in many ways, it gives us a very complete picture. So we are really engaging in a proper education of sorts, and it's expected that we do that. But we can also see some of it really exceeds beyond what we normally can do. For example, here today we're going to be looking at the aspect of implementing bodhicitta, and there's a fair few of what we can call do's and don'ts, and they are quite detailed. But we need to remember that it's so valuable for us to have some sense of the enormity of the work that we're undertaking, and also through studying this, we can appreciate the enormous qualities that our teachers have. This is a point Steve Gethin recently was making when he was going over the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, where the path of the Bodhisattva is outlined. And it's in studying works like this that we can really see how immense the qualities and you say, sophistication of the entire path really is. You know, we could receive teachings that come right from the top, from the space of realization, like the teachings of the Great Perfection. And there we would say, well, just rest in the nature of mind and, you know, just spontaneously abide without any contrivance. That's you could say, that actually is wonderful in terms of giving some idea of what the result of the path is about. What's the spirit of enlightenment? It has so much to do with what we already have, and so much to do with a blissful state that is free from worry. But at the same time also, the Buddhist teaching is very wise in the sense that, you know, we can, if we're ill, it's very nice to know what it looks like when we get well. You know, the doctor can come in and say, well, you have a curable illness, you'll be fit in no time, or you will eventually be fit. And that's wonderful news. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that we are presently patients that need to address the issues that are at hand in terms of our own confusion. So that's where we need to take the medicine. We need to be aware of what our particular predicament involves. And that's where, you know, with any kind of maintenance, either of ourselves or some of the technology that surrounds us, there's a bit to know about it. You know, you get a new computer, you get a new car, you have an illness that requires, you know, lifestyle, that requires attention to exercise and diet, and, you know, the number of, you know, medicinal remedies that you need to apply. So it's complex and it's rich. But that's where, with the Buddhist teaching, is on one hand, it's sort of, it talks about enlightenment, but it also talks about the condition that we need to face right now, which is non-enlightenment, the reality of our existing beliefs, our existing assumptions, our existing perceptions, and the solidity and the tenacity of these habitual patterns. And so that's where there is very kindly, there is a path. And, you know, as we say, there's 84,000 different teachings according to the different mentalities or the different dispositions. Anyway, you might say, we could say that I'm stating the obvious, but this is just really to highlight the value of what we are engaging in here. Now, this work that we're looking at now, just briefly to cover what we've talked about, has three parts. And the first part, which is then turning the mind to the Dharma, is the reflection on the value of human existence. And if you're a practitioner of the Ngöndro, which anybody who really is engaged in Vajrayana would be familiar with, then this is where we reflect on the value of human existence as being extremely rare, and particularly making, you could say, making it meaningful. So that's where we realize, wow, this is the great opportunity. And again, this is where in our culture, this is something that we very often would have no inkling of, because there's not a sense in our culture of really what our reality consists of in terms of the way that the mind creates reality after reality, rebirth after rebirth, and to have the presence of the teachings, teachers, the capacity to practice, and all these things coming together is extremely rare. Recently, I was listening to Jakob Leschly, who was describing when he was teaching some Chinese people about the rare occasion of having a human existence. One of what somebody in the audience says, well, if you think a human rebirth is rare, Rinpoche, you haven't been to China. So, of course, we might have a pretty ordinary understanding of what human existence is, but if we have the insight that the Buddha provides, we can see that this opportunity that we have now is so extremely precious. So that's the first reflection there. And that then is what turns our mind to the Dharma. The second is to actually really do something about it, the incentive for practice. This is sometimes referred to as sort of the riding crop that actually gets us going. It's just, or else we would also say, discovering that your hair's on fire. You know, you're pretty quick at doing something about it if your hair's on fire, or we sometimes say if you find that there's a snake in your lap, and so on. So this is the reflection on impermanence. And even though this is, you could say, something that's very obvious, it's something, again, like we say, it's that footprint in the forest that leaves the deepest imprint. If we really understand impermanence, we don't waste our time. And then we have part 3, which is then for the 3 kinds of individuals. First are those who would like to just be happy, you know, just have good rebirth. Then there's the second kind who realizes the implication of samsara. And then there's the third kind that not just realizes the problem with samsara, but also the need to benefit others. So all of this, as you can see, is part of what we reflect on in the context of the preliminaries, the Ngöndro. And so that's where then, in terms of the lesser scope, we then abide by what makes us happy. We simply want to be happy. Well, then we abide by the law of cause and effect. I remember Kangyur Rinpoche once said that what defines the higher realms of samsara is simply the awareness of cause and effect. So that when whatever actions we do, we're aware of that particular actions are going to lead to happiness, particular actions are going to lead to suffering. And that's where in the higher realms there is this awareness, and there's the, you'd say, empowered position, the sort of metacognition that allows us to understand that what is the context and what do we need to do. So that's beings of a lesser scope that then understand the need for ethical action. The medium scope, that's then when we realize the entire, even though we might have a higher rebirth, we're still caught. Like Rinpoche describes, we're still like a bee stuck inside a jar. We might be sort of up in the higher sort of realms of samsara, but we're still stuck. and we still haven't eliminated the true cause of suffering, ignorance. So that's where we wish to be free from samsara, and we reflect on the sufferings of samsara, simply being aware of the world around us. This is not being a particularly morose situation of just fixating and saying that everything is suffering. It's not, but it's to be aware of, if certain things aren't done, then suffering is there. And we can see how much in this world suffering is pervasive on the basis of simply not understanding the nature of reality. So that's where you could say the point of the Dharma here is to simply understand what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of phenomena. And that's where we then understand the nature of the conditioned existence of confusion and all the suffering that it brings. And so then we come to the what's it called, the greater scope. That's hopefully where we would like to think of ourselves as belonging. And that's where we then have, where we completed, you could say, the 4 reflections that are basic to the path. Then we engage in refuge and the conditions for taking refuge. And first there's a condition for the spiritual path, the 4 wheels. Then there's the taking of the refuge itself. And then there is then beyond the refuge then the training in the 4 boundless attitudes, which are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy or empathy, and equanimity. So then what we've then completed last time, which was, I think, late in December, this was in December 2022, then the vow of bodhicitta. So we've completed thus far, and now we're going to then see what comes when we've taken the vow of bodhicitta, which is then the vow to, beyond just our own taking refuge and doing so for the benefit of others, then also to consolidate this determination to wish to free all sentient beings. So that's where we understand the nature of that, and we take a vow to pursue that path. Now, at this point, I'd like to then, before we begin today, I'd just like to really bring home again the value of what we're doing here with the foreword by the Dalai Lama. And just read this, just because I think it's really, let's just see, really significant. Let's see if I can get this in here. And also this puts this very much, you could say, in the light of the context of where we are, because I mean the term Dzogchen is very much sort of around. Tsongsa Gyalme Khyentse Rinpoche has been very generously giving the reading transmission for the 7 treasures, and there's sort of overall in the Nyingma tradition there is this appreciation for the teaching of the great perfection Dzogchen, and there's sort of a natural inclination towards Dzogchen simply because it's something that resonates with the best of, you could say, of who we are, the natural condition of our mind. But at the same time, this is something that is so subtle. So that's where the present teaching that we have here comes from the tradition of the great perfection, but it very much also operates with the setting the context and enabling that the actual experience can take place. So that's where we have this teaching presently that is from the Dzogchen tradition, and yet it is what we call a Lamrim teaching. And this is what His Holiness then speaks about here in the foreword. He says, the view of the great perfection, Dzogchen, is difficult and profound. The main texts that explain it are Longchen Ramjampa's Treasury of the Supreme Vehicle, which is itself quite difficult, and the Treasury of the Expanse of Reality. So one is the Tektotsu, the other is the Chengzi that some may have heard about, or the Treasury of the precious treasury of basic space, I think it's called. His Holiness says, it is my advice that people who are interested in the Nyingma path in general, and the great perfection teachings in particular, should study Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's more accessible Treasury of Precious Qualities. The work translated here is the first volume of a commentary to that book by Kangyur Rinpoche, Longchen Yeshe Dorje. The Treasury of Precious Qualities is a text belonging to the stages of the path, Lamrim genre, that covers all the stages of the path to enlightenment according to the Nyingma tradition up to and including the teachings of Dzogchen. The present volume covers the sutra section that presents a detailed exposition of the path from the perspective of the three kinds of beings, classified according to their aspirations. And that's what we just saw. It opens with an account of the four thoughts that turn the mind toward the Dharma, the nature of the cycle of existence, the Four Noble Truths, and the 12 links of dependent arising. On this basis, it explains how to take refuge in the Buddha, his teaching, and the spiritual community, the significance of doing so, and how to generate within oneself the awakening mind of bodhicitta. The presentation of the six perfections, generosity, ethics, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom, includes a discussion of the three vows, the vow of individual emancipation, the bodhisattva vow, and the tantric vow, as a guide to conduct, and an exposition of the middle way, Madhyamika, as a guide to the correct view. Thorough and complete in every way, this commentary is comprehensive, fairly brief, and easy to read. I believe the members of the Padmakara translation group have taken great pains to render a clear, accessible English translation that readers will find illuminating. I pray that they will take great inspiration from it in their own practice of the path to enlightenment. So this is us. We are on the path to enlightenment. So that means we are undertaking an incredible scope. And that's where, again, it's something that is entirely unknown in our culture, the idea of completely eliminating any obscuration, imperfection from the mind that we experience from our present consciousness. And that's where we're looking at not just the sort of a subscription to some noble idea, sort of ideal, or some, you could say, belonging to some sort of a church that has a particular style of behavior and little rituals and so on, but really about working to in a complete degree with ourselves and all that this entails. And this is then what Jigme Rinpoche, in his short foreword, also just highlights, you could say, hones in on. He says that the Treasury of Precious Qualities by Omniscient Jigme Lingpa and the commentary on it composed by Kangyur Rinpoche are the works of genuine masters who are utterly free from the concerns of this world and the desire for wealth and renown. And this again is something where we cannot enough, you could say, recollect and remind ourselves what it really means and how rare it is to encounter individuals like that, even though it's just in a book form, commentary. But then we do have great teachers who are with us. And this is where we are looking at people who actually possess qualities that have been completely unknown to us in our culture, namely the completely absence of any kind of worldly concerns. So that's where the authors come from. Jigme Rinpoche says, the great value of these texts lies in the fact that they present the Buddha Dharma in a way that is truly grounded in the words of the Buddha himself. Their lineage is pure and their teachings are authentic. It is amazing that these teachings still exist. They arose solely thanks to the unspeakable kindness of the Buddha Shakyamuni, the source of the tradition, without whom neither the Dharma that we study and practice nor the Sangha to which we think we belong would exist. These teachings were brought to Tibet and preserved for us through the enlightened power of Padmasambhava, the lotus-born guru, through the learning and authority of the abbot, Bodhisattva abbot Shantrakshita, and through the protective, nurturing patronage of the Dharma king Trisong Detsen. It is mainly thanks to their sublime compassion and the compassion of those who followed them, the 25 great disciples of Guru Rinpoche, the Indian Panditas and the Tibetan translators, together with all the other masters of the lineage, that we can still receive the teaching of the Buddha and put them into practice. Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary on the Treasury of Precious Qualities translated here, is a distillation and a key to the vast array of teachings that the great beings of Tibet and India have set forth and brought to fruition. It is really an indispensable and trustworthy guide to anyone who has even the slightest interest in Buddhism, for it expounds what the Dharma actually is. It throws light upon our lives, on where we stand and on our practice. For those who read it, may it prove a rich treasure of genuine information and a constant source of inspiration and encouragement. So that in this work then touches on exactly the place where we exist, which is then our being and everything that arises from our being. This is the scope of the Dharma. And moreover, the scope of the Holy Dharma is the scope of how this condition exists in terms of the conditions when they're confused, when they are not confused, and what is the process, the path that takes us from confusion to non-confusion. So we'll now look at the precepts of the Bodhisattva, of the vow bodhicitta in aspiration and action. Let's just see here. Okay. So first, we're going to look at what this actually entails. The Bodhisattva commitment, which we've already studied in quite some detail, but just to then, you could say, make it clear to us what really we are getting ourselves into, so to speak. What is our commitment? And so this is actually quite reminiscent of, there's a lot of this that's fairly reminiscent of the way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. Anyway, so Jigme Lingpa here writes, people who give up their former pledges, rashly taken, ill-considered, would only be reputed unreliable. But if we now reject the precepts that the Buddhas and their Bodhisattva heirs have in their wisdom's power most perfectly examined, we will have deceived all living beings, and therefore we will wander endlessly in realms of sorrow. So let's say that we decide to help somebody out and we find out that we actually can't. Then we might get a bad reputation. Our friends might say, you've let us down, and so on. But here, so of course that happens. But here, that when we've taken the Bodhisattva vow and then don't commit to it, that's like really letting everybody down. So that's where there's this, you could say, injunction for us not to do that, to really understand the value of the Bodhisattva commitment. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, when people have an enthusiasm for some worldly assignment, they often commit themselves to it rashly without considering the difficulties involved, or even whether the activities in question are good or bad. So that's where we get ourselves into this situation, like we oh yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to build a house. We don't really realize what that entails. Or somebody's maybe completely financially destitute, and we'll say, oh, I'll look after you. And then we realize actually our own economy can't handle that. So that's where we might get ourselves into these kind of situations where we just have to give up. So here then, Kangyur Rinpoche says, but when it turns out that the goal is hard to accomplish, the worst that can happen is that they give up their resolve and are a source of disappointment to others. The situation is much more serious when it comes to our commitment to the teachings of the Mahayana. For when we abandon our pledge to act according to the profound and utterly reliable precepts that in their wisdom the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have studied, pondered, and meditated upon for innumerable, measureless kalpas, we are in effect turning our backs on all living beings and betraying them. So we recognize the value of the Bodhisattva commitment on the basis of just, this is the pith of what countless awake individuals have discovered and verified as being the path. It's not like we have a sort of fragmentation, you know, like you look down at the history of, for example, Western philosophy. It's a complete fragmentation of all sorts of people who have all sorts of ideas. All of them very nice, presumably, seen from their own viewpoint at least. But, you know, in all over the shop, really. And here, what we have is a unanimous appreciation for the single thing, really, that needs to be done is to eliminate confusion and to achieve awakening. And that's where, when we do this, this is completely abandoning the interest of one's own ego, completely relinquishing that on the relative level through compassion for all beings, on the absolute level, abandoning all dualistic and conceptual constructs. So that's where this teaching is something that comes down to us from countless awakened individuals for a very long time, tried and tested, if you like. And that's where the greatness of this scope is something that embraces all beings. We have, you could say, committed to the most noble undertaking there could ever be. So if we abandon that, then we're going against everything that really is worthwhile. And that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche continues. And because of this, we will pass our future lives wandering endlessly in the realms of sorrow. It is written in the Bodhicharya Avatara, how can I expect a happy destiny if from my heart I summon wondrous beings to the highest bliss, but then deceive and fail them? All right? So that's where you can promise your kids to take them to the movies, and then you finally say, oh yeah, no, we're not going to go anyway. They won't be happy. If you promise all sentient beings to establish them in bliss, and then fail them. So then the second verse then says, till now, what's happening here? Yeah. Therefore, we will do no deeds that mars a single being's joy and thus brings ruin on ourselves. If those who circle in samsara, mixing downfalls with the strength of bodhicitta, are hindered long from bodhisattva grounds, those who throw away the precepts are insane indeed. So this highlights the sort of madness that happens if we're not focused on the path, and if sometimes we're sort of kind to beings and sometimes we're not. There has to be an understanding of the value of the commitments. Here it says, it's hardly necessary to describe so great a fault, meaning to abandon bodhicitta. In sum, if the undoing of a single being's happiness, whether through killing or the theft of property, leads to a fail from the states of happiness into the lower realms, it stands to reason that we must not injure even a single being in the slightest way. So we can see that we know the consequence of killing, stealing. And that's where we tarnish ourselves. We're not part, in addition to the harm done to others, we completely tarnish ourselves. But what it's about, what if it's about letting everybody down? Of course, Kangyur Rinpoche then continues, it could be argued that unlike the vows of pratimoksha, the vows of bodhicitta can always be repaired. So somebody might say, okay, well, in the case of the monastic vows, then if you break one, well, you can, well, actually, for the most part, you can retake them. That's why we would say what is it again? The monastic vows, they can be repaired. No, sorry, this is, okay, mixing it up. So the bodhicitta vows can be repaired, that's right. We would say the monastic vows. Now there's some monastic vows. We talk about the pampashi, or the 4 great downfalls. If we break them, if for example if we're monastics and we break our celibacy vow, well, that's it, it's done for. And that's where, in the case of the bodhicitta vow, yes, if we have a moment of anger, well, this can be repaired. So that's where we compare the monastic vows with a porcelain vase. You know, if it falls on the ground, smashes, very difficult to put it together again. The vows of bodhicitta is like an iron vase. If it falls on the floor, it doesn't break. You just need to sort of, it maybe gets a bump in it, but that can be repaired. So that's where someone might say, oh yeah, well, you know, I might be sort of, I'm kind to beings sometimes, and sometimes I'm not, you know, I can always repair it. So that's where we're essentially oscillating. We're going back and forth. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, even so, a person who oscillates between a determined attitude of bodhicitta and serious downfalls will for a long time be barred from the higher levels of the aspirational practice. And the aspirational practice refers to, you know, when we have the 5 paths, it's the path of accumulation and the path of joining. These are the aspirational levels of aspirational practice. So that's where we're barred from that, to say nothing of the level of perfect joy. That's the first bhumi, which is then corresponds to the path of seeing. And the other bodhisattva grounds, meaning the 10 bhumis. The precepts of conduct must be kept instinctively as instinctively as one protects one's eyes. A person who knowingly abandons them is like a madman destroying himself. So in a sense, since those with proud determination, fueled by anger, felt at even slight discomforts and the acts that cause them, will endure the wounds of weapons, dart, or lance, and will not turn away until their aims are won. So let's say somebody's really angry. Actually, I was just reading Jakob Rinpoche's biography. It's an amazing biography. It's called The Lord of the Dance. And in there, Rinpoche describes when he was a young man in, I think it was in Nyarong, which is a sort of it's an area in eastern Tibet, Kham. And there was one family, there was 2 families that were feuding, and that resulted in one of the families practically getting massacred. Like 9 people were killed by that other family. And you know, we have in various places around the world, we have these sort of the notion of vendettas and so on. But that's where somebody who's really angry, they will sort of charge at their enemy, and no matter, even if the enemy fights back and wounds them, they don't give up. They're sort of just, you could say, completely held by this determination. So that's where, let's see here, where, let's see, Kangyur Rinpoche comments, the causes of falling from bodhicitta are many. Of these, the root cause is defiled emotion, which should therefore become for us the object of intense resentment. So when you have these vendettas, these fights, and when somebody is upset, it's because they see that their enemy is the cause of their misery, and they're going to get to that enemy. And that's where we identify what is the real enemy. You know, at the end of when we dedicate, by this merit men all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy. I remember I had one friend who said to me, but Buddhism doesn't believe in enemies. Well, no, of course not external enemies. But we do have one enemy that, as Shantideva points out, that abides in our heart. And that is the defiled emotions, the ego. And that is something that needs to be overcome. And we can do it in all sorts of subtle ways. You know, it can be, you know, on the path of the effortless approach due through profound meditation instructions, but overall it needs to be informed by this determination. And that's actually here in the footnote. It talks about what are these, you could say, the obstacles. What is it? How this defiled emotion, it can sort of manifest. And that's where there's a commentary from Khenpo Yönten Gyatso that says, according to Atisha, they are as follows: not to have natural proclivity towards the Mahayana, to have little compassion, not to fear the miseries of samsara, to keep bad company, to dismiss Buddhahood as something remote, to be overwhelmed by evil forces, to be the follower of a Hinayana practitioner, to practice with the Hinayana attitude, to turn away from any being whatsoever, to have evil intentions and speak maliciously to a bodhisattva, to fail to relinquish what militates against bodhicitta, to be lacking in knowledge, careful attention and respect, and to be prey to many emotions. Now these are, if we look at all of these, this is a rich, very rich collection of really important points to appreciate. I won't go into the details of this, but as you can see, these really speak to things that are, not far off. To have little compassion, not to fear the miseries of samsara. So often we just live in, you could say, natural selfishness or natural oblivion about the consequences of samsara and so forth. Not entirely, we can say we're innocent, because on the basis of our karma, we live in a time and a place where these things are not really understood. And also on the basis of just our ordinary ignorance and sloth. So of course, yes, this is the nature of things, but also it's then imperative that we do something about it. You can say it's the nature of things. After, if your pipes in your house haven't been fixed for 100 years, well, it's the nature of things that eventually they will burst and they will flood your house. Well, yes, you could say the pipes are innocent, but at the same time, something needs to be done. So that's where these causes of falling from bodhicitta need to be recognized, and they sort of are an expression of this enemy that's causing us to wander in samsara. By the way, I'm going to leave a few moments before the end to just take questions. So if you have questions that come up as we're going through this, please just write them in the chat box, or else just have them ready and I can unmute you. Yeah. So there, Jigme Lingpa then says, we too should wage a war against our utter enemies, the mighty hosts of our defilements. Resenting them, we should not let our discipline relax. For who indeed would cast away their keeping of the precepts? So that's where we need to, just like when fighting with somebody, we need to, you can't just all of a sudden say, time out, I'm gonna, I want to take a coffee break, you just keep on. And that's where, of course, also there's no such a thing as just then allowing the ordinary habitual dullness to take over again. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, in this connection, consider the following. Ordinary people react with a strong sense of pride and indignation at even the slightest injury, as when someone does something to reduce their influence or property. Yeah? Somebody takes your job in your career, somebody sort of precedes you, or somebody damages your reputation, or in Tibet, maybe somebody moved the fence poles a little bit or whatever, this. And Kangyur Rinpoche continues, and in real conflict, such people will staunchly resist the attacks of their enemies, refusing to back down until they have got what they want. This we see everywhere. It is the same when we are training on the path. In the struggle against the great horde of our defilements, foes from beginningless time, our enemies that have never done us any good, not even been neutral towards us, we too must retaliate with antidotes. In terms of the 3 trainings, we must say that discipline, and that's the first training, Shila, inculcates a sense of disgust for defilements. Okay, that's where we stop eating bad food. Okay, we decided we're not going to take, fatty foods. We're going to stay away from sugar. We're going to stay away from tobacco or drugs or whatever. That's where we have a strong sense of what we don't want. There's a disgust for the defilements. Concentration will in turn suppress them. Okay, so suppress is always sort of a little bit of a difficult word in modern psychology, and is generally not seen as being particularly healthy. But what we just mean here is simply that it doesn't, that they're weakened. When we're meditating, the psychological phenomena lose strength. The ordinary neuroses, traumas, memories, and various kind of phenomena in our psychology, they lose their strength. And so that's where you could say there's greater freedom. And so that's where then this leads then to an appreciation of what it is that brings freedom, which is wisdom. And that's where then we then say wisdom will eradicate them totally. So we should bear a bitter grudge against these objects of our you could say, our warfare, or our struggle, our sort of determined battle, or anyway, our path. We should bear bitter grudge against our defilements and never overlook any means to destroy them. That's why we always have opportunity when there's sort of the impulse of ego. That's wonderful. We should just say, oh, there you are. You know, I was looking for you. How are you? Now's the time to deal with you. So that's where the sort of the arising of ego or impulses is not like we say, oh my God, I have such an ego. It's like, yeah, of course we have ego. And it's wonderful when it shows its face, because that's an opportunity to be free of ego. And that's where we're clear on what it takes, namely the 3 trainings. So that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche says, who indeed would ever think of abandoning the observance of the precepts before the sublime level has been attained? That means then, for example, the path of seeing. And then it says here, those who keep, let's see here now. Those who wish to keep the trainings must, with perfect self-possession, guard their minds. Without this guard upon the mind, the trainings cannot be preserved. So that's from the, where is it again? It's the chapter on vigilant introspection, chapter 5, then in the Way of the Bodhisattva. So, so then 5 and 6, I think we can just do that before we end. If we are unaware of the extent to which we ourselves bound tightly in the prison of defilement, if we are unaware of the extent to which we are ourselves bound tightly in the prison of defilement, how can our resolve to save innumerable, unnumbered beings, bring them to freedom, not diminish? So unless we are aware of the degree to which we ourselves have defilements, then, how can we do something for others? Within the fields of carefulness and introspection, the shoots of bodhicitta may be cultivated easily. I beg that we uphold it steadily, removing faults, and strive by every means to strengthen it. So again, this is also what we have in the Way of the Bodhisattva, the chapters on carefulness, introspection, and vigilant introspection. What's known as Jemba, and no, it's Bhaya carefulness, and introspection is Shishin. Yeah. But that's essentially then knowing what it is that we are up against. Then we need to apply ourselves. And this is then on the basis of carefulness and introspection, awareness of what's happening with us. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, in our present situation, habitual deluded perception is extremely tenacious. We are tightly bound by our clinging to self and are thus locked in the prison of defiled emotion. We have scarcely any idea of what the enormous task of abandoning our own defilements involves. How could we have promised so rashly to free beings from their defilements and evil habits and establish them in the state of Buddhahood. This powerfully underlines the fact that, sorry, there's a little bit of an issue with the display. Sorry. This powerfully underlines the fact that in order to free others from their defilements, we must first possess the means to remove our own. So that is, before we begin to actually effectively benefit others, we need to attend to our own. I remember Dujun Rinpoche in his Ngundu commentary, he says it's a bit like if you have a medicinal plant. Before it actually has grown up, and then you could say gives the foliage or whatever, the fruits that can benefit the medicinal plant. If we cut it right, as soon as it sort of sprouts, then not much will ever come from it. And so we might have the intention, I'm going to benefit the world, but unless we actually mature, then it will be very difficult for us. So we need to be aware of what it is we need to attend to in terms of our own path. The first of these prerequisites is careful attention. So that's careful attention. The earnest and meticulous implementation of the rules of conduct concerning what behavior is to be adopted or repudiated. So that's where we know what it is that we need to do. You know, you come to or put into a new culture, you know, you really are not supposed to burp after the meal in this culture. Or perhaps you are supposed to remember to burp after the meal in that culture. But you just have some idea what it is, what's good behavior. You know, you're visiting someone and you are on your best behavior. Then there is mindfulness, whereby the crucial points of the training. Let's just see here. Oh. Don't know why it's doing this. Whereby the crucial points of the training. Sorry, you're also looking at this text. I'm sorry, I'm moving around like this. But okay, we're up here. Then there is mindfulness, whereby the crucial points of the training are never forgotten. Okay, so that's mindfulness, actually being on the ball. We don't forget. That's very much also when we're meditating. That is, mindfulness is this quality of not being, you know, of being simply being present. Finally, there is vigilant introspection, which keeps a close watch over our every action, whether of thought, word, or deed. And that's where, for example, we know what's going on in terms of what we do, even what we think. For example, if we're meditating and we lose mindfulness, it's the vigilant introspection that then knows that we were sitting there having an imaginary conversation or, you know, wondering what's for lunch. So that's where vigilant introspection is this capacity to know what's happening with us. So these three, they're so important. The careful attention to know what it is that needs to be done, the mindfulness that's on the dot, and the vigilant introspection that knows what's happening with us. If the mind has these three qualities, Kangyur Rinpoche says, it is like well-tilled soil. Not only can the seed of bodhicitta be planted there, but the shoots of the extraordinary attitude of universal responsibility can be cultivated easily. It is therefore important to realize the immense significance of these three factors. Nevertheless, simply maintaining bodhicitta and its connected trainings so that they do not decline is not itself sufficient. Jigme Lingpa requests us to follow a spiritual friend with great earnestness and to hear and reflect upon his or her teachings. So that's where we shouldn't just be sort of like, okay, I've got it right. I'm going to do my thing. I'm on the Bodhisattva path. Here I am, Mr. or Mrs., you know, committed to the path. And yet actually just remain within the small box of what we can imagine. That's where we need a teacher that can take us out of the box. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, Jigme Lingpa exhorts us to implement all the trainings of the Mahayana accumulating wisdom and merit, purifying downfalls and obstructions, and enhancing our bodhicitta. It's attendant trainings and all favorable conditions. So that's then where it's so important that we have a teacher that really can guide us in that process. It's a vast project, but again, it's the only one. If you're ill, there's maybe the cure is complicated, but you have no choice. Your condition is curable. And it's when it is curable, then it makes every sense to actually attend to the cure. Okay, let's just see here some. Let's see here. There are some questions and comments. Okay. So there's a comment. To be prey to many emotions. I like it. That's right. This is what we're so aware of. And the thing is also, nobody can do it for us. Nobody else can really, I mean, if somebody comes around and says you have a really bad character, then we usually, how do you say? We usually object because we will say, well, you don't know everything about me or whatever, you know. But the thing is, we know ourselves. So yes, that is very much what we're doing on the path. Where can we find the text by Jigme Lingpa? It is actually in the book. You know, if you have the book online or whatever, the root text itself is in the beginning. So that's in the beginning of the book. And then we have the commentary further back, and then the root text is just referred to. Yeah. So I'm displaying it here on the basis of having two files open, one file with the root and the other with the commentary. Then someone says, welcome back, thank you. And someone says that it's good to be back. Yes, and it's really good for me also. I always feel there's a little bit of sense of being back with the friends and doing something good together. So I guess that's it. And so, oh, hey, I want to see the gallery. So, oh my God, there's a lot of dear old friends. Hello. Oh, good to see you all. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you're all healthy, happy, practicing the path, taking the medicine, doing what needs to be done. Please remember, this will have a ripple effect. It's good for you. It's good for, you know, the people around you. Practicing is a good thing. So, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to accumulate a little bit of merit. I'm really just reading the text, you know, so we're reading this together. And I should warn you, I'm going to be reading, you know, because when are we going to find time to actually go through this text in depth, right? We might as well just say, okay, this is the time now that we're going to do it. So that's why I'm also, there's going to be references to all the footnotes, and there's also references to sort of other works, and I'll actually take them in, you know, and some of it gets very detailed. But, you know, this is the nature of you could say, the wealth of the Buddhist teaching. So let's not waste the opportunity. And after all, you know, what's an hour? Once a week, an hour. I think we can probably handle that. And it really also reflects, like I was saying before, the greatness of our teachers. You know, what they have done. You know, sometimes people might say, oh, what are these people up in the mountains? You know, how do they pass time? You know, they're in retreat all the time. What are they doing there? Well, they are doing a lot, and that's what we discover here in terms, you know, like it'll say, you know, to take refuge, to repair the vows, and all the various aspects of the skillful means of the path. There's an incredible wealth, and we're so fortunate to be heirs to that. So, thank you very much for being here. I'll just conclude with a few lines of dedication. See you again next week. Thank you. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish evermore and more.
Thanks, Jakob.
Thank you for being here. Good to see you. Okay,
Well,
Gabrielle is saying, I have the book, but I can't find the text. You know what? I think there's something about, you know what? I think you might have the old, this is the revised edition. I think it might be that they originally in the first, I might be wrong, but I think in the first edition of their translation, they didn't include the root text. I don't know. I always like when the root text is inserted with the commentary, you know, you don't have to flip back and forth. But I think there might have been something about the, I'm not sure. I'll have a look. I'll try to find out. But anyway, if you do have this, the root text is in the beginning and the commentary is in the back. Okay. Ciao for now.